I was folding laundry when I heard the mail drop. Just a soft thump at the door. Nothing unusual. But that morning, that thump changed everything. There it was. A newspaper folded in half. I only noticed it because my name was on the front page. Claire Bennett, age 31. Beloved daughter, remembered fondly. I blinked. A photo. My photo. A smile I barely remembered giving. The headline above it? Local family mourns daughter lost too soon. I dropped the laundry. My knees buckled and I had to grab the door frame to keep from falling. I wasn't dead. I wasn't missing. I was right here. Breathing, alive, still hurting, still trying to rebuild after everything they did to me. But now I was also, apparently, gone. For a few seconds, I thought it had to be a mistake. A misprint. Someone with the same name. But the photo, the exact photo I'd posted years ago on my old Facebook. The obituary mentioned where I was born, my high school, my hobbies, baking, piano, hiking. This wasn't some coincidence. This was my family. They declared me dead. It wasn't always like this. Once we were close. A picture-perfect family, at least from the outside. My dad ran a contracting business, my mom managed the house, and my brother Jake and I were inseparable. We used to build forts in the backyard until sunset. But when you grow up in a house where silence is mistaken for peace, you learn to swallow the truth. It started falling apart after Mom died. A heart attack, sudden and cruel. We were all broken in our own way, but Dad became someone I didn't recognize. Colder, shorter, more tired. Jake drifted into his own world. I tried to hold us together. I thought love was enough. I was wrong. The night it all came undone is still burned into my memory. I had found inconsistencies in the company's finances. I worked part-time for Dad's business, handling invoices and payroll. Nothing major. But one day, I noticed thousands of dollars missing. Again and again. At first, I thought it was an error. Then I found the truth. Jake had been embezzling. Quietly. Methodically. Gambling debts, I later found out. I didn't go to the police. I went to Dad. I thought I was doing the right thing. He didn't say a word for a long time. Just stared at me. Then he finally spoke. "You always were the jealous one." The words hit harder than any slap. "You want to ruin your brother? For what? Attention? Claire?" He shook his head. "We're not family anymore." I begged. I cried. I tried to show him the evidence, but he wouldn't listen. The next morning, I was locked out of the office systems. Then the locks on the house changed. Then came the final blow. He had emptied the joint savings account Mom left us. The one in both our names. Everything she'd saved for me. Gone. That was the day I stopped being Claire Bennett, daughter and sister. I became Claire Bennett, nobody. They cut me off so cleanly it was surgical. I couldn't reach Jake. Dad never returned my calls. Relatives went silent. Friends I'd grown up with stopped replying. I was shut out of my own life, like I had never existed. So I left. I packed up what little I had, changed my number, moved 3 states over, and started again. Quietly, carefully. No social media, no calls, just survival. But even in exile, I never imagined this. To open a newspaper and read your own obituary? To see your life summed up in past tense? It wasn't an accident. This was intentional. This was war. And as I stood in the doorway, trembling hands gripping the edge of the page, I realized something I hadn't dared admit for years. They wanted me gone. Not just forgotten. Erased. But I wasn't gone. And I sure as hell wasn't done. Because if they wanted me dead, they were about to see how alive I really was. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table, the newspaper still spread out in front of me like a crime scene. I'd barely slept. I kept waiting to wake up. Kept waiting for a knock at the door. A phone call. Something. Anything to tell me this was all a misunderstanding. but no one came. No one called. The world outside moved on like it always did. But inside me, something had cracked open. Something cold, something steady. They didn't just forget me. They'd buried me. And now I needed to know why. I started with the only clue I had, the obituary. I read it again, this time slowly. Every word felt like a dagger. Claire passed away peacefully in her sleep after a long battle with depression. She is remembered fondly by her loving father Richard, her brother Jacob, and extended family and friends. Lies. All of it. I'd never been diagnosed with depression. Never attempted anything. I hadn't even been sick. There was no battle, no peace. Just a cold declaration that I no longer existed. The funeral, it said, had taken place 6 days ago. 6. They didn't even wait a week before turning the page on me. I typed my name into the public records database, heart pounding as the search bar spun. When the result popped up, I felt physically ill. Deceased. Claire Bennett. Date of death, August 14th. Cause, natural causes. Filed by R. Bennett. My father had declared me dead. Officially. Legally. I leaned back in my chair, stunned. It wasn't just a public obituary. This was a death certificate. My identity had been erased. I tried logging into my old email, the one tied to my bank and my student loans. The password didn't work. I clicked Forgot Password and got the message. Account deactivated. Deceased status confirmed. I tried my health insurance portal. Same thing. Little by little, I saw it happening. My old life, piece by piece, was being cut off. Locked. Removed. Like I'd never been real at all. And that's when I understood something terrifying. This wasn't just about punishment. This was about access. Money. Insurance. Inheritance. My mother's estate had never been fully settled after her death. She had left certain things in my name. A small life insurance policy, some bonds, a trust for education. I hadn't touched most of it. I didn't even know how to access it back then. But someone else had. Someone had waited. And then, when the time was right, they killed me. On paper. The phone buzzed suddenly. A notification. I jumped. New photo tagged. Jacob Bennett. My brother. His social media wasn't private anymore. I clicked through before I could think twice. A smiling group photo? My dad, Jake. A woman I didn't recognize holding a toddler. They were at a beach house. One I knew. Our old family vacation spot. It had been sold years ago. Or so I thought. I kept scrolling, my hands shaking. Another post. Family weekend. So grateful for the blessings we've been given. And there, in the background, I saw it. A painting. One that used to hang in my childhood bedroom. The painting Mom gave me when I turned 13. She'd picked it from a flea market, framed it with her own hands. I thought it had been lost when I moved out. But it wasn't lost. It had been taken. Everything had. They'd gone through my things. Reclaimed what they wanted. Rewritten the story. Without me. A knock at the door startled me. I jumped to my feet, heart hammering, but it was just the delivery man. I stood there for a moment, package in hand, staring down the hallway like something might still come after me. Then I closed the door and locked it. I needed answers, and I needed someone who might still be willing to talk. There was one name I hadn't thought about in years. Aunt Naomi. My mother's sister. She had always been the outsider. The one with loud opinions and red lipstick who called out hypocrisy at Christmas dinner. We were never close, but I remembered something. She didn't like my father. She used to say things like, "Don't trust a man who smiles without his eyes." I hadn't seen her since the funeral. My mother's, I mean. But maybe, just maybe, she hadn't bought the story. I searched for her online and found a business listing. A flower shop in the next state over. Still active. Still hers. I picked up the phone and dialed. It rang 3 times. Then a voice answered. Naomi's Blooms. Aunt Naomi, it's Claire. Silence. The kind that stretches too long. Then, Claire? Is this some kind of joke? Number, it's me. I'm alive. And that's when I heard it. A gasp. Then, oh my God. She believed me. Someone still believed me. Aunt Naomi didn't ask me how I was. She didn't say, "It's been so long," or "I'm glad you're okay." The first thing she said after the silence was, "I knew something was wrong the moment I read that obituary." Her voice was shaky, angry. She told me to come the next day, early, before opening hours. "I don't want anyone listening in," she said. That sentence alone told me everything I needed to know. The drive took 4 hours, but I barely noticed. My mind kept looping between past and present, trying to stitch the pieces together. The cold words Dad said that day. We're not family anymore. The locks changed, the silent phones. And now, the obituary. It felt less like a story and more like a crime. The flower shop was small and hidden on a quiet street corner. A chipped wooden sign swung above the door. Naomi's Blooms, painted in faded pink script. She was waiting for me behind the counter, arms folded, lips pressed into a tight line. Older than I remembered, but her eyes still sharp, still skeptical. "You look like hell," she said. I cracked the smallest smile. "Nice to see you too." She didn't smile back. We sat in the back in a cramped office that smelled like soil and lilies. I showed her the obituary, the death certificate, the social media posts. My hands trembled as I laid everything out, but Naomi didn't flinch. She just sighed. Then she pulled out a file folder from a drawer and slid it toward me. Inside, newspaper clippings, printed emails, and a copy of a legal notice. Probate court filings. I scanned it, and my blood ran cold. The estate of Claire Bennett, deceased, has been distributed to the remaining beneficiaries, Richard Bennett and Jacob Bennett. My father and brother had taken everything, even what didn't belong to them. I looked up, my voice barely audible. "You kept this?" Naomi nodded. "When I saw your name in the paper, something in me screamed it wasn't true. I knew how they treated you after your mom died. I always thought it would come to this, but I never thought they'd go this far." She leaned in, lowering her voice. "There's something you need to know, Claire. Your mom, she had another account. Separate. Hidden." My breath caught. "What kind of account?" "A savings bond. She opened it before she married your father. Back then, she didn't trust anyone. She used to say, 'Always keep something in your name, just in case.'" Naomi opened another drawer and handed me a yellowing envelope. Inside was a photocopy of the bond registration. My name, my social security number, my mother's handwriting in the margins. "But it was never claimed," Naomi said. "Not officially." My hands shook. "So they couldn't touch it?" "They tried," she said. "The bank flagged it. Said there was no death certificate on file for you at that time. And guess what happened next?" I didn't have to guess. I already knew. They filed the certificate. They killed me on paper to access everything. Naomi sat back in her chair, eyes glittering. "They needed you out of the picture, entirely, so they could take it all. Your inheritance, the trust, even the house your mom left you in her will." That last part hit like a punch. "The house? That was in my name." "Was," she said, "until they filed you as dead and transferred it to Jacob." I stared down at the documents, my entire body trembling. It was like staring at a story written by someone else. A cruel, twisted one where I didn't exist anymore. "What do I do now?" I asked, voice cracking. Naomi didn't hesitate. "You fight." She pulled out a pen and scribbled something on a business card. "A lawyer I trust. She's handled inheritance fraud cases before. Take all this to her. You've got proof. And now you've got me." For the first time in 5 years, I felt something shift inside me. Not hope. Not yet. But something solid. Something alive. I have one more question, I said. Did they ever grieve? Did they ever seem sad? Naomi looked at me for a long moment, then shook her head. They looked relieved. That single word told me more than any document ever could. They hadn't mourned me. They'd celebrated. I stood up, clutching the folder to my chest. They think I'm dead, I said. Naomi nodded. Then maybe it's time to show them you're not. The office was smaller than I expected, modest, quiet, tucked between a dentist and a dry cleaner. But inside, it felt like stepping into a war room. The lawyer Naomi referred me to was a woman named Dina Shah. Early 40s, sharp eyes, no-nonsense tone. She wore her confidence like armor, and when I slid the folder across her desk, she didn't flinch. She simply opened it and began reading in silence. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. I sat there with my hands clenched in my lap, trying to keep my breathing steady. Finally, she closed the folder and looked up. This, she said, isn't just inheritance fraud. It's identity fraud, document forgery, financial misconduct, probate manipulation, and depending on the insurance claims involved, maybe even federal charges. I blinked. So, I'm not crazy? Dina leaned forward. No, Claire, you're not crazy. You were buried. That word again. Buried. But this time it didn't hit like a punch. It landed like a challenge. What happens next? I asked. We'll file a motion to revoke the death certificate first. That alone takes time and proof, which, she tapped the folder, you clearly have. Then we move on to the fraud investigation. But here's the thing. She paused. They're going to fight back, and the courts move slow. I nodded, already expecting that. There's one more thing, I said. They're holding a memorial this weekend for me. Her eyebrows shot up. A memorial? Even though they already had a funeral? Yes, I said. I got an anonymous text. No name, just the words. They're holding a memorial this Sunday. St. Martin's Church. 2 p.m. Dina sat back in her chair, calculating. That's public, emotional, symbolic. I nodded slowly. And I plan to be there. She hesitated. Claire, I'm not just fighting this in court, I interrupted. They stole my voice, my identity, my story. I'm taking it back. Silence stretched between us. Then a slow smile crept onto her face. In that case, she said, you're going to need backup. The days leading up to the memorial were a blur of legal filings, affidavits, and deep, cold resolve. Dina worked fast, pushed emergency motions, collected certified copies of my passport, employment contracts, tax records, housing agreements, even surveillance footage from the flower shop on the day I called Aunt Naomi. Everything that proved I had never died, that I had been here, just silenced. But it wasn't just about proving I was alive. It was about why they wanted me dead in the first place. Late Friday night, I found myself back at my tiny apartment, files spread across the floor. Somewhere in the paperwork from Naomi was a single letter, folded and yellowed, addressed to my mother. It was from her lawyer. A draft from years ago, updating her will after her cancer scare when I was in college. I unfolded it slowly. The final version had never been filed. But in that draft, it was written clearly. In the event of my death, my personal assets, including the trust account and summer property, will be divided equally between my daughter Claire and my sister Naomi. Jacob will receive nothing until completing financial rehabilitation counseling and maintaining sobriety for a minimum of 2 years. I stared at the sentence until the ink blurred. My mother had known. She had tried to protect me. And when she passed suddenly, that version never saw the light of day. My father must have produced an older copy, one without those restrictions. Or worse, forged a new one. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept playing it all back in my head like a crime thriller. Jake stealing, Dad blaming me, the locks changing, the death certificate, and now a memorial to mourn a daughter who wasn't even dead. They thought I'd stay gone, but I wasn't gone. I was walking into their lie with the weight of every truth they buried. Sunday came. The sky was a heavy gray, like it couldn't decide between sun and storm. I arrived at St. Martin's an hour early, dressed in black, a long coat, and sunglasses. From across the street, I watched as cars began to line up. People in dark suits and solemn dresses stepped out with tissue boxes and sad smiles. I recognized faces. Distant cousins, family friends, old neighbors. All of them thinking they were here to mourn me. A giant blown-up photo stood at the entrance. My face. The same photo from the obituary. Candles flickered around the edges. It was surreal. Inside the church, a choir rehearsed quietly. The organ hummed. A white program sat on every seat. In loving memory of Claire Bennett. The final curtain. I took a deep breath, heart pounding. Today wasn't just about revenge. It was about resurrection. I waited until the last note of the choir faded, until the priest called for silence. From the street outside, I watched people bow their heads, eyes closed in reverence for a death that never happened. The heavy oak doors of St. Martin's stood open just wide enough to beckon in grief. It was time. I stepped off the curb and crossed the street, each step slow, deliberate. My heels struck the pavement like drum beats, click, 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 echoing louder than the whispers that would follow. The sunlight cut through the clouds just as I reached the top of the stairs, casting my shadow across the church threshold. And then I stepped in. The air inside was thick with floral perfume and rehearsed sorrow, the scent of lilies and lies. All eyes were forward, watching the priest speak over the closed casket draped in white silk. The same portrait of me stood on an easel to his right, framed by roses. He raised his hand gently. Let us now observe a moment of silence for Claire Bennett, a beautiful soul gone too soon. Everyone rose. That was my cue. I pushed open the doors fully. The creak was loud. Too loud. Deliberate. Heads turned. The silence shattered. Gasps rippled through the crowd like thunder across a still lake. From the back of the room, I could see them. My father in the front row, head bowed, hand on his heart. Jake next to him, staring at the ground. My old piano teacher a few rows back. Even Mrs. Ellery, who used to babysit me. And every single face lifted. Eyes widened, mouths dropped. Shock, confusion, fear, and something else. Guilt. I walked down the center aisle slowly, the heels of my boots clicking on marble like a countdown. Jake stood up first, his face pale. Claire? He whispered, his voice cracking. My father didn't move. His body went rigid. I kept walking. My mother's absence was loud. Even in death, she would have seen through this. At the front, the priest stepped back, uncertain. His hand trembled on the pulpit. I reached the front row. Everyone was frozen. Then I turned around. I faced the crowd, my own eulogy audience. The photo of me smiled over my shoulder, but the real me stood, breathing, heart pounding, eyes clear. I took off my sunglasses and looked straight at the man who signed my death certificate. Hello, I said. My voice was calm, clear. My name is Claire Bennett, and I'm not dead. Someone in the back gasped. A phone clicked on. A red record dot blinked. Good. Let the world see. My father's jaw clenched. Jake sat down hard, like the air had been punched from his lungs. I know you were told I died peacefully, that I battled depression, that I faded away in silence, I said, scanning the room. That's a lie. I pulled out the envelope from my coat. Thick, sealed, stamped. These are my passport stamps, my tax filings, my employment records, my lease agreements. I've been alive, working, paying bills, surviving for 5 years. The priest took a step away from the podium, slowly backing off like he'd just realized he was part of a fraud. I wasn't missing. I wasn't unreachable. I was erased. I turned to face my father. You filed the death certificate. You declared me dead to the state. And you... I pointed to Jake. You accepted money from my estate. You took what was mine. Jake stood up again, fists clenched. Claire, we thought... No. I cut in. You knew. You knew I was alive. You knew exactly where I was. You just didn't care. Another phone lifted. Someone whispered, She's got evidence. A ripple of murmurs passed through the crowd. I turned back to the audience. You didn't come here to say goodbye to a daughter. You came here to bury the truth. But here I am. I paused, letting the silence hang. I buried the version of me who begged to be heard, who waited for a call, who thought family meant loyalty. That Claire is gone. But this one? I pointed to myself. This Claire is done being quiet. I reached into my coat again and pulled out a second envelope. This is a court order, filed yesterday. A motion to revoke the fraudulent death certificate and open an investigation into identity theft, forgery, and inheritance fraud. Jake's face went white. My father looked like he wanted to disappear into the pew. I dropped the envelope onto the podium. The thud echoed through the chapel. And one more thing. I looked up at the portrait behind me. You can keep your fake eulogies and your flowers, but you don't get to write my ending. That belongs to me now. Then I turned, walked back down the aisle and out into the daylight, leaving behind a room full of ghosts pretending to grieve. The bells of St. Martin's began to ring. How fitting. A funeral bell. But this time, not for me. The footage from the memorial went viral. By Monday morning, I was everywhere. TikTok, Facebook, even a headline on a local news site. Woman declared dead walks into her own funeral with evidence of fraud. Someone had filmed the whole thing. Me walking down the aisle, the gasps, my confrontation, the silence that followed like a dropped bomb. They posted it with a single caption. She's not dead. They just wanted her gone. It exploded overnight. I didn't plan for any of it. I didn't expect strangers to care. But apparently there's something universal about betrayal, about being erased by the people who were supposed to love you. By the time I walked into Dana Shaw's office again, the court had already set an expedited hearing. The public pressure helped. And so did the fact that the fraud was no longer just theory. It was documented, filed, recorded, evidence everywhere. Dina had everything stacked in a black folder. Proof of life, bank records, transfer logs, the invalid will, my mother's missing estate files, even Naomi's original copy of the unfiled draft. This is airtight, she told me. But are you ready for what comes next? I nodded, even though part of me wasn't sure. Your father and brother are going to come for you. Not physically, she added quickly. But they'll spin the narrative. Say you ran away. Say you lied. Say you're after money. I didn't flinch. Let them talk, I said. I've got the truth. She nodded. And now the law does too. The courtroom was cold, clinical, nothing like the church. No candles, no flowers, just facts, just evidence. Jake sat on one side with his lawyer, my father next to him, stiff in a suit I hadn't seen since my mother's funeral. His face was unreadable. Jake looked uncomfortable, like he hadn't slept. I sat across from them, alive, steady, unforgiving. The judge reviewed the files slowly. Then he looked up. Ms. Bennett, can you confirm under oath that you are Claire Bennett, born July 3rd, 1991? I can, I said clearly. And I am. And that you are, in fact, alive? I didn't hesitate. Yes, Your Honor. I've never been more alive in my life. There was a beat of silence before he nodded and moved on, his voice calm but firm. Then let the record reflect that the death certificate for Claire Bennett is hereby revoked, legal identity restored. I exhaled, but only slightly. That was only the beginning. Then came the fraud charges. My father's lawyer tried to argue that it was a tragic mistake, that he believed I was dead, that I'd disappeared, that he filed in grief. But my apartment lease, my employer's testimony, bank transactions, and passport stamps told a different story. I hadn't disappeared. I had been deliberately ignored. Worse, the transfer of funds from my trust to Jake had happened just 3 weeks after the death certificate was filed. Not grief, greed. When the judge ruled in my favor, ordering the return of stolen funds, a criminal investigation, and a freeze on all accounts linked to my mother's estate, I didn't smile. I didn't need to. Justice doesn't always look like fireworks. Sometimes it looks like silence. On their side of the room. Weeks passed. The news quieted. The videos stopped trending. But in my world, everything had changed. The trust was reinstated. The death certificate was officially expunged. I got my name, my life back. I even visited my childhood home, now under investigation for fraudulent transfer. I didn't go in. I just stood at the edge of the driveway. The place looked smaller than I remembered. Dimmer. Jake had moved out. My father, too. They were waiting on court dates, maybe even jail time. But I wasn't there to gloat. I was there to say goodbye. Because I wasn't going back. Not to them. Not to the ghost they tried to make of me. A month later, Naomi and I sat at her flower shop, sipping tea. For the first time in years, I felt safe. Do you regret it? She asked quietly. Coming back? Number telling the world. I looked out the window at the street. People walked by. Cars passed. Life moved on. I don't regret the truth, I said. Even when it hurt. Even when it broke me. She nodded, a soft smile playing at her lips. They thought they were burying you, she said. But they didn't know they were planting something stronger. I smiled back. They don't get to define me anymore, I said. I'm not the story they wrote. I'm the one I'm writing now.
Learned that my mother made a will leaving everything to my spoiled brother. So I cut all ties and stopped her financial support. A month later she called me, "Where's my no hello, no how are you?" I replied. Sometimes I wonder if everything would have been different if my dad hadn't died that spring morning. I was only 6, but I remember it like it was yesterday. Dad was making pancakes, his Sunday special. He always shaped them into funny faces that made me giggle. Mom was setting the table, humming some tune I can't remember anymore. "Lily princess, come help your old man flip these masterpieces," Dad called out, waving his spatula like a magic wand. I jumped off the couch, leaving my favorite stuffed bunny behind, and ran to the kitchen. That's when it happened. The spatula clattered to the floor, and Dad clutched his chest, his face twisted in pain. Everything after that is a blur of ambulance sirens, hospital corridors, and Mom crying. Just like that, my father was gone, leaving behind an empty house that felt too big and too quiet. Mom didn't cry for long though. She met Richard at some community support group for widowed parents. He seemed nice enough, tall with kind eyes and a gentle smile that reminded me a bit of Dad. Within a year they were married, and he moved into our house. I was trying to adjust to having a new father figure when Mom dropped another bombshell: she was pregnant. I remember her face glowing with excitement as she told me I was going to be a big sister. I was 8 when Tommy was born, and that's when everything changed. That's when Mom quit her job as an elementary school teacher. "Tommy needs me," she'd say whenever anyone questioned her decision. These early years are crucial for a child's development. I wanted to ask about my early years, about whether they hadn't been crucial too, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I watched as Mom's world gradually shrank until it revolved entirely around Tommy. She'd forget to pack my lunch for school, then act surprised when I mentioned being hungry at dinner. "Oh, I'm sorry, sweetie," she'd say distractedly, already turning back to Tommy. I was so busy with Tommy's doctor's appointment today. It wasn't just once or twice, it became our new normal. Richard noticed. I'd catch him watching Mom with a worried frown as she fussed over Tommy, completely ignoring me at the dinner table. One evening as I sat alone doing my homework, he sat down beside me. "You know, Lily," he said quietly, helping me with my math problems, "sometimes people get so caught up in one thing that they forget to see what else they might be missing." As Tommy grew older, the tension in our house became impossible to ignore. Richard tried talking to Mom countless times about her obsession with Tommy, but it always ended the same way, with Mom getting defensive and angry. I remember one particular evening when Richard brought it up during dinner. Tommy was about 5, pushing his food around his plate while Mom hovered over him, trying to convince him to eat just one more bite. "Sarah," Richard said, putting down his fork, "we need to talk about this. You can't keep hovering over him like this. He needs to learn to do things on his own." Mom's face immediately hardened. "What are you trying to say, that I'm a bad mother?" "That's not what I meant and you know it," Richard replied, keeping his voice calm. "But you got 2 kids here, not 1. And a husband too, by the way." I pretended to be very interested in my mashed potatoes, but I was hanging on every word. "Tommy needs me," Mom snapped. "He's still so young." I was young too, I muttered under my breath, but nobody seemed to hear me. The situation came to a head when Richard suggested enrolling Tommy in Little League Baseball. I was sitting on the stairs, supposedly doing my homework, when I heard them arguing in the kitchen. "Absolutely not." Mom's voice was shrill. "Do you know how dangerous baseball can be? He could get hit by the ball or twist his ankle, or for God's sake, Sarah, he needs to experience life. You can't protect him from everything." But Mom wouldn't budge. Instead, she enrolled Tommy in art classes at the community center. I still remember Tommy's sullen face as he sat there, mindlessly dragging his brush across paper while other kids actually tried to learn. He quit after 3 sessions, and Mom blamed the teacher for not understanding her son's creative spirit. Meanwhile, Richard started spending more time with me. Maybe it was his way of balancing out Mom's behavior, or maybe he just saw a kid who needed someone in her corner. He'd take me to my karate classes 3 times a week, sitting through every session, cheering louder than any other parent when I earned my belts. But while I was flourishing under Richard's attention, Tommy was becoming increasingly difficult. He'd leave his room a complete mess, toys and clothes everywhere, and Mom would turn to me with that look I'd come to dread. "Lily, be a dear and clean up Tommy's room," she'd say, not really asking but telling. One day Richard caught wind of this arrangement. "She's not his maid, Sarah," he protested. "He needs to learn to clean up after himself." That's when Mom burst into tears, pulling out her ultimate weapon. "I knew it. You love her more than your own son. How can you treat Tommy this way?" I watched Richard's face fall, saw the fight leave his eyes. He looked at me apologetically, then raised his hands in surrender. "Fine, have it your way," he said quietly, walking away. After that, he stopped arguing with Mom about Tommy. But the look he gave me said everything. He hadn't given up on me, even if he'd given up on fighting with Mom. It was a small comfort, but sometimes small comforts are all we have. High school graduation day was bittersweet. As I stood in my cap and gown scanning the crowd, I spotted Richard beaming proudly. Mom was there too, but she kept checking her phone, probably texting Tommy's babysitter. Later that evening, Richard called me into his study. "I've been saving up," he said, pulling out a folder full of college brochures. "You can go wherever you want, Lily. Sky's the limit." Before I could respond, Mom burst in. "You can't be serious," she exclaimed. "That money should be saved for Tommy's future. He's going to need it more." Richard's face hardened, an expression I'd grown familiar with during these confrontations. "This is non-negotiable, Sarah. I've already made my decision." I ended up choosing Marshall University in West Virginia, far enough to start fresh but not so far that I couldn't visit occasionally. The day Richard helped me move into my dorm, Mom couldn't come because Tommy had anxiety about her leaving. College life was exactly what I needed. For the first time, I felt free from the shadow of being the less favored child. I called home weekly, but my conversations were mostly with Richard. Mom was always too busy with Tommy. "Your brother's going through a difficult phase," Richard explained during one of our calls. His voice sounded tired. "He's hanging out with these kids from the wrong side of the tracks. I tried getting him involved in some after-school programs, but your mother—" "Let me guess," I interrupted. "She said you were being too hard on him?" "Exactly. Called me a tyrant for suggesting he might need some structure." Richard sighed. "She says I don't understand how sensitive he is." My visits home became less frequent as Tommy's behavior worsened. When I did come, he barely acknowledged my existence, holed up in his room with his video games. The few times I caught glimpses of him, he looked pale and angry, his eyes glued to various screens. After graduation, I landed a job at Deloitte in their consulting division. I stayed in West Virginia, building my career while watching from afar as my brother descended further into his self-imposed isolation. During one of my rare visits home, I tried knocking on his door. "Tommy, want to grab lunch? My treat?" All I got in response was the sound of gunfire from whatever game he was playing. Mom, passing by in the hallway, just shrugged. "He's not feeling social today. He's very stressed, you know." The contrast between our lives couldn't have been starker. While I was pursuing my career goals, Tommy was pursuing virtual achievements, supported by Mom's endless excuses. Richard's disappointed face said it all, but by then, even he had largely given up on trying to intervene. By 27, I had finally saved enough for a down payment on my own place. It wasn't huge, just a 1-bedroom apartment in a decent neighborhood, but it was mine. The day I got the keys, I couldn't stop smiling. All those years of saving of brown bag lunches and saying no to designer clothes had finally paid off. "You all have to come see it," I said during my weekly call home. "I'm having a housewarming party next Saturday. I'll cook dinner, Richard. I'm even making your favorite lasagna." "Wouldn't miss it for the world, kiddo," Richard replied warmly. Mom's voice cut in on the other line. "Oh, honey, I don't think we can make it. Tommy has plans that day." "Plans?" I couldn't keep the skepticism out of my voice. "What kind of plans?" "Very important ones," Mom said vaguely. I could hear Tommy's video game blasting in the background. The day of the housewarming, only Richard showed up. He brought a potted plant and a bottle of wine. "Your mother sends her love," he said. But we both knew that was a lie. Over dinner, Richard filled me in on what was really happening at home. Tommy, now 20, hadn't bothered with college and spent his days either gaming or hanging out with his drinking buddies. Richard had tried to help, offering him a position at his construction company. "Just as a starting point, you know," Richard explained, twirling pasta on his fork. "Everyone needs to start somewhere." But Sarah, he shook his head. Sarah said it would be beneath him. "Can you believe that?" Sadder Tommy was too intelligent for manual labor. "Too intelligent to work but not too intelligent to mooch off his parents," I muttered. Richard gave me a sad smile. "I keep trying, Lily. God knows I keep trying." That was the last real conversation we had. 2 years later, I got the call that changed everything. Richard had collapsed at work, massive heart attack just like my father. By the time I made it to the hospital, he was gone. The funeral was surreal. Mom put on quite a show, sobbing dramatically and telling anyone who would listen what a wonderful husband Richard had been. "We were so happy," she wailed. "How will we manage without him?" I watched her performance with a mix of disgust and pity. Her tears weren't for Richard, they were for herself. I could see the wheels turning behind her grief-stricken facade. Richard had been the sole breadwinner. Without his income, how would she maintain Tommy and the lifestyle to which he'd become accustomed? Tommy didn't even bother to wear a proper suit to the funeral. He showed up in wrinkled khakis and a polo shirt that had seen better days. He spent most of the service staring at his phone while Mom made excuses for him. He's processing his grief in his own way. Standing there at Richard's grave, I couldn't help but think about how history had repeated itself. Another father figure, another heart attack, another funeral. Only this time I was old enough to see everything clearly, including the fact that Mom's tears were more about her bank account than her broken heart. A year after Richard's death, I had mostly lost touch with Mom and Tommy. What little I knew came from Aunt Linda's occasional calls. "They're getting by on Richard's savings," she told me. "Your mom sold his Chevrolet last month. The tools from his workshop went before that." I tried not to care. I really did. But when Mom's number flashed on my phone one Tuesday evening, my heart still skipped a beat. "Lily?" Her voice sounded smaller than I remembered. "I need you to come home, please." Something in her tone made me book a flight for the next day. When I pulled up to our old house, I barely recognized the place. The once pristine lawn Richard had meticulously maintained was overgrown with weeds, paint peeled from the window frames, and one of the shutters hung crooked. But the house wasn't the only thing that had aged poorly. Mom opened the door, and I had to suppress a gasp. The vibrant woman I remembered had been replaced by someone who looked 20 years older than her actual age. Deep wrinkles lined her face, and her hair, which she'd always kept perfectly colored and styled, showed stark gray roots. "Come in," she said, leading me into the living room. The house smelled musty, and dishes were piled in the sink. A thin layer of dust covered everything. This from the woman who used to make me rewash plates if she spotted a single water spot. "Mom, what's going on?" I asked, settling onto the couch. A spring dug into my thigh, another thing Richard would have fixed immediately. She broke down almost immediately. "We're running out of money, Lily. My pension barely covers the utilities and the savings." She twisted her hands in her lap. "They're almost gone." "What about Tommy? Is he helping with expenses?" Mom's face did this complicated dance between embarrassment and defensiveness. "He's looking for work. It's not his fault. These employers, they just don't understand him. The last place wanted him to start at 8 a.m. You know, Tommy's not a morning person. And the one before that expected him to do manual labor. With his intelligence, I felt my jaw tightening. Mom, at his age and with no experience, he can't exactly be picky about. "You don't understand," she cut me off, her voice rising to that familiar pitch that always preceded a Tommy defense. Then abruptly her tone changed. "Lily, we need your help. We won't survive without it. I hate to ask, but you're doing so well in your career." I knew what was coming. Part of me wanted to refuse to remind her of all the times she'd chosen Tommy over me. But looking at her worn face, the trembling hands, the desperate eyes, I couldn't. "How much do you need?" When she said $1,500 per month, I nearly choked. That was a significant chunk of my salary, but I found myself nodding anyway. "Where's Tommy now?" I asked as I prepared to leave, already regretting my decision. "Oh, he's at a job interview." Mom brightened slightly. "A very promising position with a tech company." Through the window I could see Tommy's bedroom light on, and the familiar flicker of his computer screen. Some things never changed. True to my word, I set up an automatic transfer of $1,500 to Mom's account every month. Each time I saw that deduction from my bank balance, I told myself it was the right thing to do, even if it meant postponing my own plans for a bigger apartment or a new car. I started visiting more frequently, though each visit felt like walking into a time capsule. Tommy was always there, either glued to his computer screen or sprawled on the couch with a beer in hand. "How's the job search going?" I'd ask. "Mind your own business?" He'd snap, or sometimes just grunt and turn up the volume on his game. During the holidays, I couldn't stand seeing the living room in such disrepair. The wallpaper was peeling, and there was a water stain on the ceiling that would have driven Richard crazy, so I spent my Christmas bonus hiring contractors to fix it up. When Mom sprained her ankle in February, I called to check on her. "Oh, it's not so bad," she said, though I could hear the pain in her voice. "Is Tommy helping you?" "He's busy with some online interviews." I hired a home health aide the next day. The money I'd been saving for a vacation went to cover her wages for the next 3 weeks. Then came the day I walked into the house and found a stranger sprawled across our sofa. She looked like she'd stepped out of a reality TV show, fake nails that could double as weapons, heavy makeup and clothes that left little to the imagination. She was scrolling through her phone, surrounded by empty chip bags and soda cans. "Who are you?" I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I knew the answer. Tommy emerged from his room. "This is Candy," he announced, "my fiancée. She lives here now." Candy didn't even look up from her phone, just popped her gum loudly. I watched in disbelief as she reached into the grocery bag I'd just brought and helped herself to the premium cookies I'd bought for Mom. "Nice to meet you too," I muttered under my breath. Later that evening I called Mom to get her take on the situation. "Oh, Lily." She sounded more animated than I'd heard her in months. "Isn't it wonderful? Tommy's finally settling down. Candy's been such a good influence on him. He hasn't gone out drinking with those awful friends in weeks. That's because she's drinking all my imported beer at home," I thought, remembering the empty bottles I'd spotted in the recycling bin. But I held my tongue. "And he's talking about getting a job," Mom continued excitedly. "Candy's cousin knows someone at a tech startup. Tommy says it could be his big break." I made non-committal noises while thinking about the dozens of big breaks Tommy had mentioned over the years. But Mom was so happy, living in her bubble of perpetual hope, that I didn't have the heart to burst it. My next visit home started like any other. I juggled grocery bags as I pushed open the front door, only to stop dead in my tracks. The house looked like a tornado had torn through it. Dirty dishes piled high in the sink, takeout containers scattered across every surface, and clothes strewn about the living room floor. Candy lay sprawled on the couch, perfectly manicured nails tapping away at her phone screen. She didn't even look up as I set down the groceries. "You know," I said, "my boy's sharp. You live here rent-free, eating food that I pay for. The least you could do is wash a dish or two." She looked up slowly, a smirk playing across her heavily glossed lips. "Who do you think you are to come in here giving orders? This isn't your house. I grew up here," I shot back. "You're just a guest." That's when she laughed, a harsh, triumphant sound that made my skin crawl. "Oh, honey. You've got it all wrong. This house belongs to Tommy now. Your mom signed everything over to him. There's a will and everything." I found Mom in the kitchen, organizing coupons she never used. "Is it true?" My boy sounded strange in my own ears. "Did you make a will leaving everything to Tommy?" She wouldn't meet my eyes at first, fiddling with the papers in front of her. Then something seemed to harden in her expression. "Yes," she said flatly. "It's true. I don't understand." The words came out barely above a whisper. "I'm the one helping you. I'm the one sending money every month. Tommy doesn't work, doesn't contribute anything. Don't you dare talk about your brother that way." Mom's voice rose sharply. "You don't understand him, you never have." "Understand what? That he's a parasite? That he's perfectly content to live off my money while his girlfriend trashes our home?" "Oh, stop being so dramatic." Mom's face twisted into something I didn't recognize. "You want to know the truth? I never loved you the way I love Tommy. He's better than you in every way that matters. And I don't want to see you here anymore." The words hit like physical blows. All these years I'd told myself that Mom did love me. She just showed it differently. That somewhere beneath her obsession with Tommy she cared about me too. Now I knew better. I turned and walked out, Candy's triumphant laughter following me down the hall. 21 years of hoping, of making excuses, of trying to earn my mother's love. All of it ended with the quiet click of a door closing behind me. The drive home from Mom's house was a blur. I don't remember the 4-hour trip, don't remember climbing the stairs to my apartment, don't even remember sitting down on my couch. But I do remember the moment of clarity that came as I stared at my phone's banking app. The automatic transfer to Mom's account, $1,500 every month for the past year. My finger hovered over the screen for a moment before I decisively clicked cancel recurring payment. For the next few weeks I threw myself into work, trying to ignore the hole in my budget that suddenly felt like an opportunity rather than a burden. I started researching investment options for the money I'd been sending home. Maybe I could finally start saving for a house of my own, a real house, not just an apartment. Then, exactly 1 month after my last visit home, Mom called. "The money didn't come through," she said without preamble. "No hello, no how are you. There must be some mistake with the bank." "There's no mistake," I replied, surprised by how steady my voice was. "I canceled the transfers." There was a moment of stunned silence before she exploded. "You what? How dare you? After everything I've done for you." I actually laughed at that. "Everything you've done for me? Like what, Mom? Forgetting my existence? Forcing me to be Tommy's maid? Telling me you never loved me? That's different." She was using her familiar Tommy defense voice. "You know I was upset. But you can't just stop helping us, we're counting on that money. Tommy and Candy are planning a vacation to Cancun. They need a vacation?" I interrupted, my voice rising. "Tommy needs a vacation from what exactly? Playing video games? Drinking beer?" "Let me tell you something, Mom. Tommy doesn't need a vacation. He needs a job." "How dare you speak about your brother that way? You're just jealous because what? Because you left everything to him? Fine. You made your choice. Now he can take care of you. You ungrateful, mercenary little." The rest of her tirade dissolved into a stream of accusations and demands. I let her rant for a moment before speaking again. "Goodbye, Mom. Don't call me again." I blocked her number before she could respond. But Mom wasn't done. Over the next few weeks the messages started pouring in through every possible channel. Facebook messages about how she was struggling to pay bills, Instagram comments about what a terrible daughter I was, emails detailing all the sacrifices she'd made for me, most of which I couldn't remember actually happening, Tommy joined in too, sending aggressive texts about how I was destroying the family. "Mom's crying because of you," he wrote. "You better start sending money again or else." I blocked him too, but not before replying, "Here's a crazy idea, try getting a job." Candy even tried reaching out through LinkedIn of all places, with a long message about how I was breaking my poor mother's heart, and how Tommy was too sensitive to handle the stress of work right now. I had to admire her creativity at least. It's been 6 months now, I don't know how they're doing, and for the first time in my life I don't feel guilty about that. Maybe they finally realized that Tommy needs to support himself. Maybe they're still waiting for me to cave in and start sending money again. Maybe they've found someone else to manipulate. The truth is, I don't need to know. What I do know is that the $1,500 I used to send them every month has gone into a down payment fund for my own house. I know that I sleep better at night, no longer awakened by angry messages or guilt-tripping calls. I know that Richard would be proud of me for finally standing up for myself. The other day I drove past a construction site and saw a "now hiring" sign. For a moment I thought about taking a picture and sending it to Tommy, but then I just smiled and kept driving. Their problems aren't my problems anymore. Finally, after all these years, I'm free.